I'm going to try to create a squash and stretch attribute just using the translate Y of my hip control. So first I'm going to create the squash look using the flare actually. So I'm not going to be using the squash, I'm going to be using the flare. So I'm going to select these two pieces of geometry, hit deform, nonlinear, flare, and first I want to take this flare and bring this low bound to 0 and just bring this to the bottom of my object. So I'm going to snap it into place, and first I'm going to get the squash look to make sure I have everything in order. So if I bring this out a bit, maybe increase the high bound a bit. So maybe I want just a little bit of a curvature there. Okay, so let's say that's my, maybe a little bit more. Alright, we can decide that in a little bit, but that's where I want my high bound to be for my squash, so I'll leave that there. So let's go into our set driven key, set, and I'm going to load my hip control into my driver. I'm going to select this flare handle, my outliner, then select this flare input and hit load driven. And what I want is to connect my translate Y to my curve and actually my high bound as well, because we're going to be shifting the high bound for the stretch. So since everything is at 0, I'm going to hit key, and now I'm going to bring down my hip control. So notice it starts to intersect a little bit because of how it's painted and how the weights are painted, and the proximity between this joint and this joint. So I'm just gonna bring it down to just before it starts to collapse. So I think like right around there to be safe. And I'm going to bring this curvature out for my squash, maybe around there, and maybe I'll bring my high bound down a bit. And then I'll select key. Hit 0, everything should come back into place. And now I'm going to translate my hip control upwards for my stretch. Maybe value of 3. And then I'm going to bring my high bound up a bit. Curve this guy in to kind of emphasize that stretch. Let's see. So I'm going to try to maintain this rim that I have at the top of my bottle. Okay, so I'm happy with that, so I'm going to hit key. Alright, so if I hide this for a sec, move to 0, everything should go back into place. So now I have this hip control that just by translating Y, it controls the squash and stretch of my bottle here. So I can kind of, it's like a little subtle, but I can kind of see my high bound physically shifting through my bottle. So I might want to mess with those keyframes in the graph editor. So if I go, I'm just going to zero this out. If I go into my graph editor, animation, graph editor, and I'll find my flare handle. Okay. I want a seamless transition from my high bound at my squash to my high bound at my stretch. So I'm going to delete the keyframe, the middle keyframe for my high bound that I had at 0. And also I can shift this to linear interpolation so it's seamless. There's no ease. And I'm going to keep the curve keyframe at 0 just so I have a constant. And I might shift this to linear as well and see how that looks. Yeah. So now my high bound is moving in a linear curve, so it's a straight line, so it's not lagging at all, and you're not seeing the high bound physically shifting through the bottle. Earlier I was talking about being conscious of this collapsing that we have. So what I'm going to do is set limits to my translate Y of my hip control. So even before it starts collapsing, now we're having this weird defining line. So I might want to set my limit right before that begins. So maybe around there. Even earlier. Maybe right. Oops. Maybe like around there. So I'm going to go into my attribute editor, and you'll see limit information in this first tab here. And I want to just hit this arrow so this value goes to this box, and I want to hit check. And then I'm going to go up until we set our keyframe at 3, so I can just check this on, make sure this says 3. And so now my hip control is limited in translate Y from this value to this value. So now I don't have to keep an eye out for that collapsing. Okay, so I can still rotate this. Now I just have a little bit of squash and stretch. Okay. So I want this to follow my rig as well, obviously. So first off, I'm going to create a flare group. And then I'm going to create a group for any deformers that I might make in addition to this one, and just bring this group under this one. And so for this particular deformer, I don't want it to follow the rotation of the hip, but I do want it to follow the rotation of the bottle as a whole. So what I can do is actually just parent constrain the flare group to the base joint. So I'm going to select the base joint, select the flare group, go to constrain, open up my parent options, make sure translate all and rotate all are selected, and hit add. So let's see. So if I move this along and I translate this up and down, it should be still squashing and stretching. And if I rotate this and move this up and down, it should still squash and stretch. So it follows this base joint. Okay. Bring all that to 0. Cool. Also, I want to take this group and just bring it under my whole soap dispenser group. So everything is under one group, but still you're using your master control to move your rig and not your group.